Ready? I'm going to call the special meeting, emergency meeting of the January 25th, 2018 Montecito Planning Commission. I'm Joe Cole. I'm the chair of the commission. I've asked for this meeting so that the county's Planning and Development Department could provide the commissioners with more information about rebuilding Montecito. And this also gives the public and our commissioners the opportunity to provide input to the Planning and Development Department. I've been the publisher of two of the largest newspapers in the South Coast, and I've always thought it's great to get information, accurate information, out as quickly as possible. I was talking, we've all been talking with lots of people for the last month and a half. I was speaking with Gwen Luria, who's the president of the Montecito Union School Board. We were at Cottage Hospital a few days ago. And she said that our community is not just a place, it's a state of mind. And people think that Montecito is great because of its incredible natural assets. But Montecito's greatest assets, she said, are all the people who choose to live here. Now, for 41 years, I've had the privilege of living in Montecito. Raised my kids here, and I think as we go forward, people are going to see the strength that we've had, the generosity in our spirit for a long time. Now, it's a small town. We all know each other. We all know people who've died and who are injured, who've lost everything, who've lost a little bit. I'd like to stand just for a moment of silence for all of them. If you would, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. We still have the rains. Today is not a day to gloss over anything. Today is a day for information from our Planning and Development Department. I'm going to change a couple things on the agenda, which is within my discretion as chair. Item number, I will get to that. Item number 4, public comment for items other than things on the agenda. I'm going to actually move to the very end. And if you will remind me, commissioners, not to forget that, well. So we will start with the agenda. Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Villalobos, the TV coverage announcement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The special hearing on January 25th, 2018 will be televised live on County and Santa Barbara Television, CSB-TV Channel 20 at 1 p.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of this special hearing will be on Saturday, January 27th, 2018 at 5 p.m., as well as Sunday, January 28th, 2018 at 5 p.m. on CSB-TV Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's YouTube channel, CSB-TV's website will be available for download in a day or two. Do I think to move on to the roll call?
Please.
Roll call, Commissioner Keller.
Present.
Commissioner Newman.
Present.
Commissioner Senauer.
Present.
And Chair Cole.
Present.
Thank you.
Item number 1, Thomas Fire in January mudslides rebuilding report. Would you please read the item, Mr. Villalobos, and you may start after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Montecito Planning Commission will receive a report from the Planning and Development Department on rebuilding after the Thomas Fire and January mudslides.
Please start.
Of course. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. I'm glad you're all able to be here today, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you and the community with information about our work on recovery for the Montecito community. Can you go to the next slide? So So obviously we're here to talk. Oh, wait. I should introduce everybody that's here. How about if I do that?
Yep, please do so.
Okay. So with me here today is Matt Pontus. He's right behind me. He is the assistant CEO. Is that right? And in charge of this whole recovery effort. So Matt has been pretty much living and breathing at the EOC, and we're in really good hands having Matt at the helm. Also with me is your Planning Commission Secretary, Jeff Wilson. He is also the Deputy Director of the Development Review Division, so key to this effort. Masood Al-Bahoda is right next to him. He's our Building and Safety Division Manager and our building official. Jeff and Masood are going to do the bulk of the presentation today. And then at the table we have Petra Leva. She's our one of our supervisors in planning and development, and she is really running our part of the LAC, the Local Recovery and Assistance Center. She's staffing that. She's dealing with a lot of the aspects of what we'll be talking about today with case managers and just getting us organized to help people in the most effective way we can. Steve Mason, who is the other assistant director in planning and development. He oversees building. He assists Petra. He also does lots of other things, but for your purposes today, that's his role here, and then obviously you know who I am.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I know many of you have been working in the Emergency Operations Center and other places, so I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, I think Mr. Chair, this is important. It's important for you, each of you commissioners, both personally and as community representatives, to really know what's going on so we can get the word out. And I think it's very important that this is televised. I know there aren't a ton of people in the room, but that's okay because they're either watching now or they'll watch later. So I think what we'd like to do is kind of try and go through the whole presentation, and then we'd be happy to entertain any questions you have, some of which we'll be able to answer and some of which we won't.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So just to start off, you know, we're here really to talk about recovery following two major events in the Montecito area and the South Coast, the Thomas Fire and the 2018 storm event. Planning and Development has a lot of experience, unfortunately, with rebuilding and recovery after fires. We've dealt with 3 major fires where there was a lot of residential homes affected. The Painted Cave Fire, the Tea Fire, and the Jesucita Fire. And we really know how to deal with that process. And we're going to use all of the tools that we have in this recovery effort to deal with this recovery effort. But it's different. You know, recovering after a flood of this magnitude is different for quite a few reasons. The first is we've never had a long-term exclusion zone, and I'll show you a map in a moment that shows where that is. There's an area of the community that was very significantly damaged. Oh. I have to start over. We're going to hang on for a second because for some reason they're not getting a signal.
Oh, take your time.
Flood, debris. Apparently we have a technical issue with.
A small technical issue is nothing in these days.
There will be more, I'm sure. I think I'm okay to go forward. Okay. So big difference, long-term exclusion zone. You know, as a result of the flood, the mudslides, there's a portion of the community that is going to take longer to recover than other parts. We have very significant infrastructure issues, many of which are being tackled, but we've got, you know, public bridges, private bridges that need to be addressed, and it's affecting access to the area. We had water and sewer and, you know, all sorts of electrical, gas, all sorts of issues to deal with really before we could start getting people back into their homes. And like I said, many of those are resolving and they're in good hands, but it's different than the fire. Probably one of the most significant issues is fires don't change topography, and this did. And so we need to figure out how to address changes in topography and creeks and the width of creeks, depths of creeks, et cetera. And then on top of all that, once you have a fire, you don't worry about a fire again. Well, we're in a state where we need to be very vigilant, and we need to be prepared for addressing additional rains. It's only January. The rainy season goes at least through March. So this year we've got to be vigilant. So it's just a really different situation for us to deal with. So what we're going to focus on today, after I show you the maps, is really the rebuilding process based upon the fire model. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the properties that weren't as significantly affected by, with significant changes to creeks and adjacency to creeks and topography. So we're going to have to deal with those properties on a case-by-case basis. So I just want people to keep that in mind. When we talk about rebuilding and using the fire model, we're really talking about those properties that were less affected by the event. So I thought it might be interesting just for people to see two maps. One is, I'm sure, a map that everybody is quite familiar with. It's the one that's on the county's website. It just changed today. Can you pull the... So this map was just updated. As you can see, there's a big area that's been opened up for repopulation in between the two blue areas that this morning when I came to work was red. So I think that's good news. The blue areas are the longer term exclusion areas. And if you click on those, you can see that the county is making opportunities available for residents to go in, assess their properties. If their houses are still standing, go in and get some things that they might feel are essential, but actually to get out there and look at their properties, because many people in these areas have not been able to get out, and they won't be able to repopulate for some time. Upper Village just got released today, so that's really good news. I think some people may have their offices up there that would appreciate being able to get back. Coast Village Road was yesterday. So I think we're making progress. I think the sheriff is trying to get people in as soon as it's safe for them to get in, and taking into consideration other needs in the area. There's a lot of mud to be taken out of debris basins. There's a lot of traffic on the roads. So in any event, that's kind of the map that I think everybody's used to seeing. Let's go to the second one. This one you haven't probably seen. If you have, I'd be surprised. And this is going to lead into Masood's discussion with you. So ignore the base colors on the map. This was done on a base map several days ago, so it shows old exclusion areas, voluntary and mandatory evacuation areas. But what we've done on this map is we've inputted the data from our safety inspection program, and so you can see there's red, green, and yellow triangles, diamonds. I don't know what this shape is. Diamonds, and you can actually zoom in and get the status of, what building and safety found on a particular property. And then the purple, darker purple underneath is all of the cases in planning and development that we have in process in this area, because we need to figure out, what are we going to do about these cases? And so we're starting to sort of overlay that information and sorting through that as well. So we'll be making this map available in the next day or so, probably a couple days after we've really looked at it and made sure that it's as accurate as it can be. But I thought you might be interested in just seeing the data that we're collecting and trying to synthesize with the damage data. And with that, are you going to go next? With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Steve Nason.
Afternoon, Chair Cole, Planning Commissioners. As you noticed, we have gone out and done safety assessments, and under the building code, it's our responsibility to provide information to property owners about the safety of their structures after events such as this. And so we have a classification system that we use, red tags, yellow tags, and green tags. And through a process over the last week, we teamed with City of Santa Barbara inspectors and went out for 4 full days, I believe, 6 full days this past weekend, and probably logged, I don't know, the teams of inspectors all those days. So we've been compiling that information. It has been a challenge in that there's been areas that we couldn't get to due to ongoing utility restoration and just general access. We're pretty much there. It does say assessments completed. We're actually out in the field right now. So we had hoped that we would get them done, finished yesterday afternoon, and we had some remainders to do today. The numbers actually have changed a little bit. We're at 232 for the red tags, and we're at 137 on yellow tags. So that and our inspections are a little bit different than the ones that you may have seen on the interactive map that CAL FIRE published. They basically were talking about the percent of the structure and how much had been damaged. Ours is really about safety and how people can access their structures. To go into that, thank you, Jeff. Red, the property is destroyed off the foundation, walls compromised leaning, or substantial mud intrusion, which can lead to a number of issues, electrical issues, mechanical issues with the plumbing, heating and air conditioning, things like that, as well as the plumbing. So those systems have to be checked out. The yellow limited entry, a lot of those, most of those are from mud and water intrusion, specifically in the crawl space, which can damage electrical wiring, of course prevents issues with mold and things like that if it stays in there long enough, as well as you can have isolated damage to peripheral areas of the structure that would have to be cordoned off. And then lastly is the green, which is habitable. We go through and we try and inspect structures that are adjacent to areas and just determine if they've got just a little bit of cosmetic damage to the outside. A lot of homes had mud flow right past them halfway up the structure, and it didn't go inside, and they were very, very fortunate. So that's sort of the classification system that we have. And then we've also down at the resource center, we've got instructions for people on what to do for each level of notice on their property, and we'll be making contact with, but we're going to go into that in a few slides. Okay? I think that's it. Jeffrey.
So Chair Cole, members of the Commission, we wanted to give you an update as far as what steps the department has taken and what our next steps are. And there's a number of things that we are running in parallel to each other. As far as the Building Safety Division are out there doing inspections, assessing the safety of the structures. On the permitting side, we have staff that have been at the local Recovery and Assistance Center, as well as staff from Building and Safety Division. So when members of the public arrive there, they can talk to both divisions to get as much of a complete picture as they can on the building and safety side, as well as any expectations on permitting. So at that recovery center, we're making contact with property owners, and at that time, those that have came in, we're assigning them case managers. And part of that program is, and for those that weren't here for other disaster events or other events, is that the model is to create a single point of contact for the members of the public so that they have one voice that they can communicate with on the department side. So that's what we're in the process of doing, parallel to what Masood and his group are doing, is doing the safety assessments, is Petra and her team are taking that information and putting it into a case file management system to assign planners and other staff to be that single voice. We're continuing to have technical difficulties today. So we have started assigning case managers. If a member of the public has property, they can we'll be contacting them, letting them know who their case manager is. So if they have a tag on their property, they can call that person. They can do the research for them and get back to them, so they don't have to call multiple members of the department to find answers. So that's the model that we're trying to create or recreate. So the next step is to go out and to make contact with property owners that we haven't met with at the Assistance Center, give them directions as far as who their case manager is, what they can do as far as getting the information they need to start the recovery process, rebuilding process. Part of what we're doing in that effort is assembling property profile cases where we're gathering as much information historically on that property that we can ascertain in the department, what permits are available or have been issued on the property, what blueprints are available. So that way, when we get contacted or when we make contact, we can say, here's the information we have, here's what we can do to assist you in rebuilding or recovering your property. One of the things that we are also offering is we did an initial assessment of the property that you saw on this map. What we can also do is, once you make contact, you go out there, we need more clarification on what needs to be investigated, what damage needs to be assessed further. The Building and Safety Division is offering an optional second inspection to go out there to at least provide guidance on what areas could be investigated by your licensed professional. Maybe it's mechanical, electrical, foundation, structural. So that information or that option is available once the public gets back to the property and start assessing what had occurred on their property. One of the things that we wanted to talk about as far as the Planning and Development Department is concerned, the clearing of mud and the natural materials that has ended up on people's property, we're not going to be requiring any permits from our office, such as like a grading permit. However, we are encouraging people to work with other local agencies, county departments that they may need to communicate with as far as environmental health, possibly solid waste. There may be other agencies or departments that they would need to communicate with. But as far as our office, the message that we're sending is that we're not going to be requiring any permits from our office on the clearing of the mud and debris. And then in the inland and coastal areas, the structure removal, we're going to be considering that as an over-the-counter demolition permit, so they could come in and say, my structure was damaged. I need to remove what's left of the house or the structures. We'll be able to do that over the counter and issue those permits to help expedite the process so that we can help with the recovery rebuilding aspect of it. In regards to the permitting and the planning side of the process as we move forward, this slide is focused on the residential structures, the dwelling units. That's what we are primarily concerned about at this moment. And the process is, if you want to build like for like, then it would be exempt from planning permits, and that's really where the case manager is going to become useful for, is to help the public navigate this process so they can meet with them and say, okay, I want to build like for like, exactly what's out there. Then the case manager is going to help them navigate that process. If there's no change to the exterior of the house, then it'll be exempt from further bar review. However, if proposals come in and say, I'm going to rebuild, but I'm going to change the exterior of the house, then that could be subject to bar review. But it would still be exempt from planning permits, but it might need to go through a design review process in that case. And then the permits that we're anticipating for that would be if a member of the public comes in and says, well, I want to rebuild my house differently than what was previously permitted, or I'm going to make substantial changes to the footprint or the height of the building, then that could trigger a permit, either if you're inland, a land use permit, or in the coastal zone area, CDP. So that's, I think, the value that the case managers are going to have is to help those decision points that the public may be deciding on, like for like, or do I want to make some changes? And in that case, the case manager can help direct them on whatever path they are going to go through. In the permitting on the building safety side, I'll turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about. I don't want to talk outside of my area.
Thank you, Chair Cole, members of the commission. We've really got two different styles of permits that you're going to have. You're going to have the repairs for those structures that didn't have major changes to them due to the mud or water flows, where they've just been inundated, and you're going to be removing finished materials, checking your plumbing, checking your electrical, redoing some of those systems, maybe replacing your heating and ventilating, things like that. So those will be an over-the-counter permit where we're just going to issue that. The other ones are going to be a little more involved, where you're going to need to have a set of plans that meet the current code and are reviewed by the department. We're committing to a 2-week turnaround for residential structures, so that people can, once they get their plans up to the current code and submit, we're going to review those in 2 weeks. And then for accessory structures that need structural repair, we're going to, our current target for turnaround on plans is 30 days, and we're going to hold to that as well.
So I think I'll just wrap up. This is kind of our last slide. So you can tell from this presentation that the majority of the permitting hopefully won't make it to your commission, and I think that's a goal. We're hoping it won't even make it to us in some regards. If people choose to build like for like, it really is exempt from planning permits, goes into the building process, and we get people on their way as quickly as possible. But there are some things that are going to be challenging in this recovery, and I think in the longer term exclusion area, there may be some policy decisions that need to be made, and those might result in potential ordinance changes to the community plan to address some issues. And so your role, excuse me, you really play a vital role in representing the community and letting the Board of Supervisors know what the community would like and receiving input. So definitely see that there may be a role for the Montecito Planning Commission there. And then clearly we want to keep you updated, and by updating you, we're really updating your community and our community on the progress we're making in the recovery process. And so our commitment is to provide you an update every meeting you have. It might be just numbers of people we've contacted. As a little bit of time goes on, it will be the number of people who have actually chosen to initiate the rebuilding process, and whether they're going through the like for like or the other path. And we just want to provide you with as much information to keep you abreast of what's going on. So that's really what we had to present today, and we're happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much. I've been getting lots of questions from members of the community. I'm going to take a round of questions from the commissioners, if you have any.
Yes,
Commissioner
of
Keller.
course. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. You've pulled a lot of information together very quickly. And also, I want to really commend the local recovery and assistance center. I went down there myself, and I was really impressed. It was very user-friendly. It was very comprehensive. I saw people from all economic levels and all walks of life making use of the facility, and I was really pleased to see that everyone felt welcomed and taken care of, and I thought that was really important. I had the opportunity, along with Commissioner Newman yesterday, to have a lengthy tour of Montecito in the company of Fire Chief Hickman, and I think we were both really impacted by the complete resculpting of our community, and what an incredible task is ahead of us. So I'm hoping we can all work together. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I happened to be standing in line at the post office for 3 hours last Saturday as I collected my mail, and I was directly behind a member of the Board of Architectural Review, and at the end of our conversation we agreed that we'd like to send as commissions, I can't speak for the entire commission, but I think that everyone will agree that we'd like to get the message out that we want to support and encourage and make feasible as much as possible the rebuilding effort, and not retain our previous characterization as being possibly an obstacle to development. But in this particular occasion, I think we all need to pull together to encourage rebuilding and rehabilitation. I do have some specific questions about the, on page 7, when you talked about the no permits required, Mr. Wilson, I had someone tell me that their contractor, landscaper, whatever, started removing some mud and then was told they needed a permit. And so, and yet it's not clear from whom. Is there any way to coordinate this so that you can, there can be one place where people find out what kind of permit is required? Because otherwise there's going to be a lot of confusion.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, it's a really good point, and we have a daily mud coordination call, and there are a lot of unanswered questions. I can tell you that from a planning and development standpoint, we're not going to require a grading permit to remove mud. You didn't put it there, it's really not grading. But there are some other agencies and organizations within the county that do need to be coordinated with, and it's complicated by the fact that we are, at this moment trying very hard to clear the debris basins and some other critical infrastructure areas. And we don't want all these trucks competing for road space. They already are, as you probably are aware if you've been in and around the community. So we are coordinating, and we hope to come up with a very clear path very, very soon, and we'll let the public know.
Thank you. I had two other questions. One, on page 8, when you're talking about rebuild like for like, is there any discretion in that? I mean, as long as it's substantially like the previous building, can you make slight improvements? And would it be a planner's decision as to whether or not it is in substantial conformity with what was previously there?
So I think the code section, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, the code section I think says within 10%. So the whole idea is that you don't change the overall volume of the structure. So it's the basically 10%, within 10% of the existing footprint, within 10% of the height, that sort of thing. And that the architectural features are not substantially changed. If you want to change the architectural features, might require a trip to the BAR. But otherwise, we sort of refer to it as the squint test, meaning, it's pretty darn close. It's within 10%. That's considered like for like. So yes, there is some discretion and there is some flexibility.
Thanks. I actually have two more questions. I apologize. On page 9, when you talk about being having the plans, having them comply with current code, so there will be no grandfathering. It'll be current code in existence now, or is this something else that might have a little discretion?
Hi. Only if they're rebuilding brand new building. So that's when they have to comply with new code. Or if they're putting new electrical mechanical system, that has to comply with new code. But the rest of the structure can stay the same. So if they're doing repair, just that repair work has to comply with a new code.
So this would be in the yellow area where they may choose to replace all their plumbing or all their electrical.
It could be red area that it's damaged up to 3-4 feet, and they decided that they want to salvage the building, and they remove the material, and they don't have to bring the structure structurally up to the new code, but electrical system, mechanical system, they have to comply with new code.
So, excuse me, but that raises another question, which is, so if someone has a red tagged building and they want to rebuild, they can still do so? They're not, for any safety reason, obligated to demolish it?
That's a decision between them and their insurance company, right? I mean, there is, if the we will ask them, I mean, after they remove the mud from inside of the building, we will meet with them and detail out the scope of the repair that needs to be done with their contractors and their design team. At some point, the insurance company may decide that it's cheaper to demolish the building and start new, because some of these houses, they can have mud up to 8 feet inside the building. And that definitely must have affected the foundation, because this mud, they weigh about 120 pounds per foot of mud, 120 pounds per square foot, per foot. So if you have 8 foot of it, basically you are loading the building by about 10 times what we have actually designed it for, just vertically. So at some point, there are some of the buildings that they have a lot of mud and debris inside. They cannot be salvaged. Just financially doesn't make sense. So if they decide to demolish the building and build a new building, then they have to comply with the new code.
Thank you. And
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, I just want to make sure that this point is really clear, and so that's why I'm going to say it a third time. Just because you have a red tag doesn't mean that your building has to be demolished. So it's different than the damage assessment, and unfortunately I think some of the colors were somewhat similar. So the damage assessment that was done in the maps that are published shows % of damage, and I think some people think red tag means, oh, it's a complete loss. It's not necessarily a complete loss. It might mean that it's not habitable because they have substantial mud in the house, and they may work through those issues and decide it's better to salvage, clean the structure up and fix the systems than demolish the structure and rebuild it. So I just don't want people to think we have 232 houses that have to be demolished and reconstructed. Not necessarily.
thank you. That's a good clarification. And just the last question about the MPC involvement. How would potential ordinance and community plan changes be triggered? Is that something that we would come forward with in terms of thinking there's a need that needs to be addressed? Or is that something you would present to us and then we would try to help craft it? And who creates the language of the new ordinance and who would amend the community plan? If you could explain that process, it would be helpful.
Sure. So, I'm so used to calling you Madam Chair, and I'm looking at you, and so if I ever call you Madam Chair, I apologize. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, typically ordinance amendments and general plan amendments, including community plan amendments, start with the board expressing a desire. So that can happen lots of different ways. Through our work program, we ask you and the County Planning Commission and other advisory groups to the Board of Supervisors what you think we should be working on. That's one way. Another way might be a discussion that the board has where they direct us to do some work, in which case, we would come to you for advice and input, as we're drafting changes. And if you see something that you want us to take to the board, you can make suggestions as we do these monthly briefings. But typically it comes from the board, but in a variety of different ways.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Newman.
Thank you. I too want to express my appreciation not just to the staff that's here, but the staff that isn't. I have a case manager, and I've been to the local assistance center, and I'm grateful for those assets and assistance, not just to myself, but to our community. I have some questions on the PowerPoint and some comments later. First, with respect to the damage assessment, Mr. Mason, if I could, I guess, address this to you. I understand that there's a difference between the CAL FIRE DIS damage assessment, which was in the orange and different colors, from what our department has done. And I'm wondering if you could explain to the public, in particular, the difference in the damage assessment if a property went from one status previously to a different status presently. And I think that's important for people to know, particularly if their status has changed.
Chair Cole, members of the commission. Again, CAL FIRE was looking at a % of structure that had been impacted by either the fire, because we're actually talking about the fire and the flood, today, but primarily the flood. So they were really looking at a percent of structure damaged, and they have a formulaic approach to it, number of inches, feet of mud, and they consider it a damage threshold. Our assessments are for safety, and so we're not looking at necessarily the amount of damage to the structure, but how the damage affects occupancy and safety of habitation. And so those are the real differences. So if we have classified a structure as unsafe, CAL FIRE may have not had it at that level of damage, but they're looking at just damage. We're looking at the safety of the structure.
Okay, appreciate that. With respect to the red tag procedure, I know literally a tag is put onto the affected structure, or if it's an outbuilding on the main home. I'm wondering if we can perhaps lessen the trauma to our community by having an advance notice to people of that, so they don't go home with the expectation of being able to enter into one place or another, and notify people in advance by phone or email that they do have a red tag structure and should exercise that care.
Chair Cole, members of the commission, we have been gathering the information about all the properties. The only contact information that we would have would be property owner, name, and their address from assessor records. So it's certainly something we could investigate, but we would not have any other telephone numbers or email addresses for folks in our system.
And I might just offer a suggestion in that regard, if we can go beyond our system, the assessor system does compile email addresses from people who receive email notifications of the assessments and the like. So if there is an overlap between those and you use APNs, then you would have access to either phone and or emails, and hopefully that might work. As a question on page 7 about demolition, debris removal, and the like, my question, particularly because I know a lot of people will be concerned, having suffered material substantial damage, if not complete demolition by virtue of the mud flow, how about grading permits? If somebody, for instance, would want to, for the sake of rebuilding, have a structure within their lot but elevated from its prior site, would that be okay? And similarly, how about relocation on the lot, even if the footprint were the same and so on?
Commissioner, Chair Cole, members of the commission, if we're not requiring grading permits for removal of debris, but if you're going to change the elevation of your lot or the configuration, you're going to need to get a grading permit because we'll be looking at the engineering and making sure that it's safe. And certainly if you're in an area of inundation, you're probably going to want to have that review so that we can make sure that any future development has been done in a manner to avoid any kind of hazards. Relocation on the lot would be something that wouldn't be like for like, so you would need to go through our planning process and get a coastal development permit or a land use permit. But certainly within the bounds of the ordinance, people can make those sort of changes. And we've noticed that people often take the opportunity after reflection to make changes after these types of events. And certainly in the fires, many people chose not to rebuild in the same fashion.
And just one more question with respect to grade. If somebody finds that their lot is now below grade from its prior topographic levels, can they restore it to the prior grade without permit or review?
No, that would also require a grading permit.
Okay, so anybody who's been impacted in that regard has a permit. And then lastly, a question on page 10 with respect to permits and in particular accessory structures. And, you know, I know here we're getting into perhaps uncertain areas. If somebody had an accessory structure and that it is now required to be demolished, rebuilt, or what have you, would the same review apply if they seek now to have it become an ADU?
Oh, that's such a complicated, that's a complicated question. And one I had
I knew it was easy to
thought
state,
of.
but more difficult to answer.
You know what we could do would be to follow up on at our February 21
Yeah.
hearing with the answer to that. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
May I just ask a question to follow up on what he was talking about with grading?
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, because what we saw yesterday was a substantial change in the geography, topography. And so if someone does have a substantial mud deposit on their property, if they choose not to regrade, will there be any kind of geological survey required? Are we able to assume that the mud flow is stable enough to rebuild on, or what kind of process will address that?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, I think that's part of what this MUD team is kind of looking at. I can tell you from discussions with Masood and others in the department, you can't just build on this. I mean, it needs to be compacted and tested, and it needs to be engineered. So it's going to require a level of review, because we want to make sure, no matter what, we want to make sure that people are building in a safe way that doesn't impact their own building or the building of people around them. So it's going to take a pretty specific kind of case-by-case review of those situations, and will require definitely some engineering and work.
So, Commissioner Newman, any final questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Senard?
Thank you. First of all, to the community, their recovery is on the way. There are short-term and long-term approaches, but the rehabilitation of this community is on the way. And I think being as positive as planning and development seems to be, and we are aboard as a team member, the Montecito Planning Commission, and the community hopefully will become every day more resilient than it has been. So I thank everyone, the community, and everyone here. I do have a few questions, and I basically, in the overview about rebuilding on property that was so devastated, that is in locations that perhaps are going to be reviewed as to safety issues, proximity to creeks, riparian watershed and all. And does the MUD team, what team is going to be dealing with the helicopter view, so to speak, that will zero in on a particular location and the homes that were within these areas? Is it going to be adaptive management sort of approaches? Things are different now and will be different. Just a thought?
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Senauer, probably not the MUD team as the MUD team, but probably some of those same participants, and FEMA and other state and federal agencies may have some role in determining how that area will sort of recover and rebuild. Certainly our own flood control, probably transportation. So I think it's Army Corps. So I think it's going to be an interagency discussion. We say we're in the recovery mode, but we're kind of a little bit still in the response mode
Yes.
too. So, in some areas we're more response, in other areas we're more recovery.
Yes.
I think we're still a little bit more in the response mode in that highly impacted area. And as we move a little bit past that, I think there will be more discussions and decisions about how that will happen.
I have a question about caseworkers and how they are assigned. I know Commissioner Newman has a caseworker. I was just down at the local assistance center, and I was trying to get a algorithm in my mind about how, if your house has been impacted, how you connect with a caseworker, and it seemed a little complicated, but maybe not. And I was perhaps Petra, you could answer that. Thank you.
We are assigning case managers. Basically, if a property owner comes down to the center and talks to a staff person, then they have established a relationship, so they automatically will become their case manager. In other properties, we are just going to assign them case by case.
And how is that assignment made? Do they make a call and say,
we are going, if we have no contact, then we will be sending them a letter.
And if they're not at their house and the mail is
when they get
coming?
their mail after waiting at the post office for 3 hours, they will know.
Okay.
We'll reach out to them however we can, but we are definitely going to send letters.
Okay. Is there along this line, and I think talking about the specifics of how the displaced and affected can basically go to a point and get correct information. I know the county has a site. P&D, Planning and Development, seems to have the site has not changed. There is no like a banner saying, if you were impacted in any way from the Thomas Fire or the floods, please follow these instructions, or here's, I'm trying to permitting and building and safety is huge. And at your site, I think from those I've spoken to at the LAC site, it would be helpful that they could go online and find a very simple sort of 1, 2, 3. Could you help me out with this? Thank you.
Chair Cole, members of the commission, we are working to, as we've just gotten to the point where we've identified all the structures and thereby the property owners, we haven't yet made those changes. We're, as Mr. Wilson spoke, we're compiling all the case information. We're going to try and set up an electronic case file and the ability for the property owner to actually access that information online and then be able to contact their case manager. We find that we've also created a workflow process chart for the rebuild, and we've got some other information that's also available at the local assistance center. We haven't made changes to our website yet because we haven't actually gotten products out there and available, but we certainly will be. And the goal is really to try and get online information that we have about parcel information, permit histories, and whether or not we've created or obtained plans on a site where the property owner can access it, and it's not just a general available to anyone who logs in. So we're going to try and make a individual property file.
I understand that will take time. My question, and I'm sure that was going to be your approach. My question was a very simple flag or banner saying, you know, with permitting, you know, do they make an appointment? How long? All this. Parking's expensive when people come down here, you know, if they're there for 3 or 4 hours. Something to simplify the process and make it much more accurate. Is there?
Chair and members of the commission, we certainly can do that. That's a great suggestion. And we'll assemble the information that's already actually readily available right now and collect it and put links to it and everything on there. So a great suggestion.
I have another question about mud removal and no permitting for just the mud removal. EHS was mentioned, Environmental Health Services, as possibly needing to be contacted because it may be within their purview, is that correct? And how would a homeowner understand that they need to contact EHS? If they don't need a permit, but perhaps they need to basically contact EHS for a certain kind of permit.
Chair, members of the commission. So the question, let me make sure I get what you're asking about, because mud removal is one of the biggest challenges we have today because there is no clear mechanism for it and no real regulatory structure for it. So we are, as an organization, going through that. As I said, our regulations don't require a permit. There have been a number of pieces of information that Public Works, Solid Waste Division has set forth that is out there right now on mud flow cleanup. As far as environmental health, public health department, when you get a demolition permit for a structure that has been demolished, either through the fire or the flood, we actually have a requirement which we will inform people of when they're going through that process to receive sign off, because there's regulations regarding the disposal of hazardous materials, and so they actually are the Environmental Health Division of Public Health is actually out in the field today inspecting homes where they can get in and collecting propane canisters, paints, all manner of stuff, and that's another area that is still a little bit in the evolution stage where we get a clear set of guidelines. But there are things available down at the LAC, and certainly if it's going to be required under our permitting structure, we've already we'll be informing people of that.
I have one last question. The line in front of the cemetery of 50 cars waiting to be escorted, I believe. Is that the site? Is that the site there? Can someone tell me the escort site in front of the cemetery, where they're going and what they're doing?
I think, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Senauer, I don't think that's one of the sites now for the long-term evacuation area. So today and tomorrow, people are being escorted that have homes within the long-term exclusion area. I'm not sure I'm using the right words. I'm a little tired. Sorry.
Oh.
But so if you go onto the map that I showed you before and you click on the area where your home is, it'll say meet at Vaughn's at 10 or meet at Vaughn's at 2. I think the one by the cemetery was the one that that the Sheriff's Department was managing when they were doing escorts in to take care of critical needs. I left my pet and I'm really concerned about my goldfish, or I left my medication and I can't get it refilled, or something like that. They were doing that for some period of time.
Having taken advantage of that, yes.
Yes,
That was for
and-
the individual
Yes.
escort. But now they have set up areas that either are taken from Vaughn's or from the Crane School
Right.
parking lot.
Right. Okay.
And they've given you specific times at which to gather.
So I'm not sure they're using the other areas still,
Oh,
but
there were about 25
Okay.
cars there,
Well,
so
maybe-
they're using
yeah.
it for
Maybe
it
it's-
was just a question.
maybe it's for people
Yes.
so there's
In that
still
m-
other areas
correct.
that people can't access, that are exclusion areas. They're not in the long-term exclusion area, but they're still under mandatory evacuation. So maybe they're still doing that operation for those folks that are
Great.
in that
Thank
third
you.
area.
Good answer. I've been to all of them, and I'm looking at the website to see when I can get to my home. We're going to take public comment now. And if I miss something on the checklist, it's because the checklist is in my office in Montecito. And I haven't been there for a few weeks.
At this point, there are no public comment slips.
Okay. Well, we may have one. Have you ever filled out one before? Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Laurel Perez, and I'm a principal planner with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. And like everyone in this room, we care deeply about our community and really applaud the work that the Planning Department has done, as well as all of the county departments, and the work that you are embarking on today and will continue to do so. I know Suzanne wanted to be here, and she's at another hearing at the City of Santa Barbara, but just want to let you know that we've offered our services on a voluntary basis to help out in any way we can, and appreciate any opportunity to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public speakers? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Then I will go to final comments of the commissioners unless staff has anything else you'd like to add.
So, Mr. Chair, since I made Mr. Pontus attend this hearing, I want him to at least have the opportunity to address the commission. And I think maybe his insight on this mud issue, which I know is of, great interest and concern to people, would be good.
That would be great. Well, thank you for attending. We'd love to hear from you.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Matt Pontus, again, Assistant CEO, and I've been Director of Recovery for the county's efforts. And as you're probably well aware, it started with a search, started with a warning to the community, then it moved into an event, which moved into a search and rescue and search and recovery mission. And now we're really more focused on the recovery side, but as was alluded to earlier, there are still a lot of mission critical things that we're doing from a response effort. Obviously we want people to get back in their homes as soon as they possibly can and when it's safe to do so. So everybody's worked great together to come together to really get those utilities back up, even if it was temporarily, to get power restored, to get gas restored, to get the water systems operational, the sanitary systems operational, and to finish with our debris clearing of the roads, the debris basins, and the channels. And in those efforts, we were prioritizing to get the community back in there, but also making sure that during this time that we're focused on safety. We know that we have a lot of work left to do in those debris basins, and we know that having that many dump trucks through our community is not only drastically different than the community is used to, but we've had a lot of challenges as the whole greater community isn't used to having that many dump trucks on the road. And so we've enforced with all of our drivers and all of our agencies safety in driving around. We've tried to reinforce that with our community to be aware of those trucks. We still have a huge mission to clear those debris basins, and the amount of time it's going to take to clear those debris basins is estimated to take until March. So to give you some value, and these numbers are not completely firm, but I want to give you an idea that currently we are about 10% done with our debris basin cleaning as we look across the debris basins as it moves through the foothills. Out of the debris basins alone, we have figures around 9,000 loads that have already been taken out of those debris basins. When I say loads, I mean out of a dump truck that is typically between 10 yards and 15 yards capacity. So we estimated early on that we had about 1 million cubic feet of sediment to be taken out of those basins. So that's a pretty big number. And as we go through, and we've been addressing the creek channels to make sure that we have well-defined, at least as possible, creek channels cleared before the next storm. And in those areas, we're about 30% done. We've done about 3,000 loads with about 10,000 or so left to do, or out of about 10,000. In our roads, and as you probably saw when you went up and toured the areas, there's been a lot of progress on the county roads up there within the community, and they've moved about 5,000 loads already out of those areas. And this is a monumental task, and it's a lot of vehicles out there. Certainly, we're concerned as we move forward that the repopulation efforts will put a lot of extra traffic and congestion in those areas that may at some point limit our ability to provide for the aggressive debris basin and channel clearing that we've been trying to do. We've been running those trucks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we need to continue to do so. We're in a situation where those debris basins were cleared prior to this last storm event. And if we have another storm event prior to them being cleared, we know, and the scientists tell us, that that's not a good combination. So currently we're working on the timing issue of the trucks and truck routes and the traffic, and with a mission of winter readiness for the community. We want to make sure that as the days and weeks unfold, that we send a message out there that we prepare the community for the next rain events. We, as staff alluded to earlier, we don't have a perfect plan for the debris removal. It's been historical that we haven't required a permit for the debris removal, that we haven't required a grading permit, I'm sorry, for debris removal. But we've never incurred this amount of debris within a community. Preliminary estimates, which are just preliminary, we've had a lot of scientists out there, and we have some really top-notch pictometry and other tools analyzing how much debris is out there. But we're thinking that there's probably another 750,000 cubic yards of sediment on the community and in those areas. So when you talk about that in terms of number of dump trucks and loads, certainly we need to be able to address that. We don't have the capacity in local landfills, nor even in our beach permits or emergency permits, to be able to handle that amount of sediment. So we're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to engage in communications to a higher degree with the community on what are our solutions in Montecito. It, as you've already know, it does look different. And I like the term that the commissioner used earlier on resculpting. It's been resculpted. And for the last over 100,000 years, that's how we have a flat buildable areas in Montecito as those depositions came down those canyons. So the Office of Emergency Management at the EOC will continue to work on storm readiness. We'll continue to meet every day with the geologists, the hydrologists, and all of the burned area emergency review teams and watershed emergency review teams. They're working long days and nights to be able to get as much data to us so that we can incorporate that not only in the storm readiness part, but what to do with the sediment that's there. We know that when it rains, our thresholds have changed. After the Thomas fire, we have a smaller threshold now for the amount of rain that it'll take to move sediment through those watersheds. And to several of the commissioners' comments earlier, we are trying to look at creative ways in which to utilize some of the sediment there as protection measures for future events. I'm positive that we have the right people on the job, and that we've got the right community engagement, and we've got the right planning and development team here to work through these. But we're on new ground now, and literally, and so we'll be working back, and as the team talked about, we'll be back presenting at this commission on this topic for months and years, probably, as we look to integrate all these things together and make sure that we're providing a safe community and allow everybody to get back to where they need to be. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do one last round of questions and comments from each of you, and then we'll move on to the next item. We'll start with you, Commissioner Newman. You don't all have to speak if you don't want to.
With respect to the County Executive's Office, I just want to say thank you not only for coming, but I think that she and the entire office have been phenomenally responsive and done a wonderful job. It's hard. But for myself, for our community, we've got to do better. I'm fond of a quote that I'd like to share. You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. And with that in mind, and my personal experience in the loss of life and much more serious property loss than my own, I look forward to working with the excellent experienced staff we have with our community and to draw on the expertise of both. This is not the first natural disaster to befall our community, and I think unfortunately but predictably with climate change and other influences, it's not going to be the last. And I hope and know for all of our sake that we're going to bring the finest attributes we can to this process. And for myself, that list includes creativity, reasonableness, a can-do approach to problem solving, education and endorsement of the best practices that will yield a more resilient and sustainable community, be it a single-family home or a commercial building. Enhanced and better communications. I heard mention of that, and I hope we have, by example, FAQs and the opportunity for members of our community to ask questions online. And I think it's important for our community that we ask for your patience. As has been said, and maybe it's trite, this is going to be not a sprint, but a marathon. So when you're asked to slow down on the road, to let a dump truck go by, when you need to wait on the 101 or whatever it may be because of the traffic, please exercise patience. And understand too, with our staff and our resources, that we're ultimately doing the best we can, but that they're limited. And that our staff are people too. Thank them. Be appreciative. Also, I think we all need to keep a perspective and focus. It needs to be positive. And lastly, I hope we all work collaboratively on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. Build consensus as to how to approach issues of concern in a very local way. Come to our staff, come to us with those solutions. If they're reasonable, if they're grounded in good practices, we'll embrace them too. And lastly, please keep informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Newman. Commissioner Keller?
It's unfortunate that that wasn't our conclusion rather than our beginning, because it was very eloquent. I think that even those of us who have just been mandatorily evacuated for 2 weeks are suffering from a certain degree of PTSD. I know I am, because it is so frightening and distressing what has happened to our community. And so this is a time for us all to be our best selves. And I will take, it was, I think, Chip Hickman who said, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and I think that's accurate. And I like the fact that Bob Hazard, who's been doing a really wonderful What's Up Montecito post, quoted Helen Keller, my namesake, as saying, when one door closes, another opens, but often we have looked so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that is opened. So I think I agree very strongly that this can be an opportunity, and when we get past this necessary grieving phase, we will have the opportunity to strengthen and improve our community. And I'm sorry to ask a really mundane practical question after all of that, but one question that Mr. Hickman could not answer yesterday when we did the tour. I was in Ventura on the weekend at the fairgrounds and saw the huge piles of mud and the many, many boulders, but there was just sort of natural debris down there. And when we did the tour, there are so many washing machines, cars, pieces of plumbing. And is there any distinction in terms of where that debris is being taken? And who has the responsibility for that to get cleaned up, not just off the roadways, but off the public right-of-way and the whole area? I think there's been a phenomenal job done so far. The opening of the 101 is incredible how they were able to do that. And when I compare Jameson North Jameson with what I saw as I evacuated 2 weeks ago. It's amazing what has been accomplished with an incredible degree of cooperation and coordination. So I just was wondering, in the next phase, how will we continue until everything is done, or will there be certain gaps to fill up?
So, Commissioner, through the chair, the Ventura facility, like we have a few others, is a sorting facility, as you saw, and we're doing our best to make sure that we have an aggressive sorting campaign that seeks to recycle as much as we possibly can out of the metals. The wood debris is being taken and chipped and used as chipped and mulch. We have rocks that are going to different facilities, and I'm sure we'll be using a lot more of those ourselves in the future. And so, and a lot of the sand, once it comes out of that particular thing and has been completely sorted and out, has been going to refill some of our beaches, Eglita Beach and Carbonaria, under emergency permits. So we have these sorting facilities. We've had an aggressive campaign to make sure that we're doing the best practices we can with the materials that come out of there. And you bring up a good point in that we have not concentrated on the private debris, but we do have a team that's working on where it's going to go. And now we know that it's going to need to be sorted for different metals and different types of things as people find appliances and things like that. And we have a team of folks working on that. And just like some of these other questions, we don't yet know in some cases. We're working on it. We've got some great ideas and some real creative ideas, and are looking to a lot of our partners north, south of us, and here on the Central Coast to help us. So,
thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It synthesizes so much. There's a lot more to be done, but a lot has been done, and thank you so much. I think balance, from what you were saying, is an important denominator in all this. You're having mud removed, sediment removed, a lot of trucks, and you need the community to understand that they need to understand balance of removal, of getting the community safe again, the land safe again, and I think that's an important concept, and I think you made that very, very clear, that there's an understanding that needs to be recognized, and I think it is. Perhaps it could be done better, but I think individuals who have been displaced want to get back, and that you understand the horns of the dilemma, as it's been said. I think the other point or consideration I'd like to make is land use sustainability. And I think that's what this community is going to be looking at more and more. It's going to be redeveloped, but in a sustainable way, different than it has been in the past. And I have a quote here about sustainability, and its basic definition is balancing economic, ecological, social systems, and public safety, public health and safety, to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And I think that's a reasonable definition which this community will embrace. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to the next item in the agenda. I don't think that one's going to take very long, but if any of you want to leave, I will not take it personally. I know you have other things to do that are life and property savings. Thank you very much. I'll have a final comment, but Mr. Villalobos, would you please read the next item into the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Montecito Planning Commission will provide an advisory recommendation to First District Supervisor Doss Williams regarding 2 members of the Montecito Planning Commission to participate in the stakeholder group for the recovery of Montecito being assembled by Supervisor Williams.
So, as many of you know, our Supervisor Williams is reaching out all across the community, engaging all the stakeholders to have a voice in putting in the recovery of Montecito. We've received an invitation. I think what he's done is he's gone through and asked the chair and the vice chair and many organizations, all the private organizations, they're still putting that together. First of all, because we're a public entity and we want to be transparent, I just didn't want that to go by without mentioning it. And I have a recommendation. It's always Supervisor Williams' discretion in these matters, I believe. But I have a recommendation. I personally have been involved very deeply in some private efforts on the recovery. So I'm going to, and I think my time would be more effective for the community spent on those. So I'm going to recommend for the Commission's consideration that that our representatives be Commissioner Newman, who's the vice chair, who was invited. I haven't seen the official invitations, but I'm not on everything. And I'm also going to suggest that Commissioner Keller also be one of our 2 designees. Commissioner Keller, as many of you know, has lived in the community a long time, a former elected member of the Fire Board, member of this commission, member of the MBAR, which I think will be very important. The only question I have, and it may be a Council Brown Act question, is if any of these 2 are traveling, I think there will be a lot of meetings if it's patterned on other community processes I've seen. If any of them are traveling, could we have Commissioner Senauer as an alternate? Maybe it's too early in the process, but I thought I would ask you anyway.
So, Chair and Commissioners, I think that's a fair point to designate at this time. If there are future questions that arise in regards to participation, our office is happy to work with you through those questions that may arise. But I would note as a general point that under the Brown Act, advisory committees that are comprised of less than a quorum of members of the Commission are exempt from the Brown Act. So as long as only 2 of your members are meeting as part of this stakeholders group, then you would not be required to have an agenda for the Montecito Planning Commission,
Okay.
and that would be something we want to be cognizant of.
Okay, so we'll handle it informally, being very careful of the Brown Act. So I would recommend, unless anybody has a contrary suggestion, that Commissioners Newman and Keller be our designees to the recovery stakeholder group, and that Commissioner Senauer be an alternate, never at any time having more than 2, so that we don't violate any Brown Act provisions. Commissioner Newman.
So moved.
Yeah, I don't even know if we need a motion. Do we need a motion, Council? Yeah. Okay. Motion withdrawn. So, you know, I think our next meeting is February 21. I would ask Ms. Black or anybody else at the county, is there any other information that we should have on the tape for people who might be watching this? I think you've been really good at setting forth all of the websites and numbers, but is there anything else we should have in the record?
Well, Mr. Chair, if anybody's watching and their property has been affected and they don't know who to contact, just call the main number at Planning and Development, call the counter, go to the local resource assistance center, you know, in any way that they feel comfortable, and we will take hold of them and help them through the process. So that's all I would say.
Okay, thank you.
And we will try and get some additional material up on the website.
Okay, I'm going to move to adjourn. I'm seeing.
Chair, excuse me, if I may, before you adjourn.
Yes.
You had continued the general public comment period till the end, and I recommend that you hold that now.
Thank you. You have a comment? Go ahead.
Yes, no, just a question. Is there a closing date for the local recovery and assistance center?
So, yes, very good point. So the local recovery and assistance center is going to be closing, I believe, after Saturday, February 3rd. The hours on Saturday are 10 to 2, and then following that, I think there's already planning occurring about some sort of recovery assistance center. Probably won't be as big or quite as thorough as the current configuration, but something maybe a little bit more in the heart of the community where people can go. For planning purposes, we're going to use those case managers to really provide continuity with the community. So I don't think we'll be staffing the Recovery Assistance Center in any significant way. We have a lot of people involved in this, and so if you came in and talked to them, you're not going to be talking to your case manager. So we're going to handle it a little bit differently. But this is, you know, our number one priority. It's the number one priority of the people who are case managers, and so they will be extremely responsive and helpful.
Commissioner Senauer.
Before we adjourn, for the next MPC meeting on the 21st, do we want to basically think about asking for a briefing from a particular agency or department? I think our agenda is slim. It's 3 items for, I don't have it before me, but if there's an opportunity for a briefing from one area that we could slip in, I think that might be appropriate.
I think that's a good idea, and I will work with staff on that.
So remember, one of the things I promised is every time you meet, we will talk about this.
We will talk about this, and we do have your ADU question to follow up on.
And if there's anything else, yes, if the chair can let us know, that would be perfect.
Commissioner Newman.
The only other thing I would ask, maybe we might consider on an ongoing basis to have a portion of our meeting for commissioner requests for perhaps future consideration. And one I would like to offer in that regard is that we might have an update on just status of major projects that have come before us, appeals and whatever. Could even be done in a table format so that we know what's happened since we took action or did something last year. Where is it now, particularly if it's over, how did it end, or what happened, and so on, and just kind of as a way to track things and know where they stand so they're not forgotten.
Ms. Black.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to make sure I understand your request. So is it with respect to property or projects that might have been affected by the storm, or is this just generally?
Yeah, general. This is not related to the storm, just more generally. So as an example, appeal XXX was heard by us, and the ultimate end of that appeal was such and such. Or with respect to the 101, we had a briefing in June, and the status of the 101 or roundabouts is such and such. Just a bit of an update so we can look and see what from last year is closed, so to speak, and over, and what represents perhaps hanging chad, if I may use that phrase.
So, Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Wilson can work on a list, and maybe the first one, we won't hit everything that you've thought of, and you'll say, next time you do this, could you make sure you talk about the Miramar, or what about Casa Dorinda and the storm damage, or so we'll take a shot at it.
That would be very helpful.
And then we can take it from there. How's that sound?
Yes, I've noticed that there's appeals that have come back to the board of supervisors for my first tour of duty.
Yeah, we try to update you on things that the board has heard as part of the director's report, but we'll see if we can reach a little bit deeper.
Okay, well, I'm going to close with a very brief final comment. First of all, I appreciate everybody from the county coming in today. I think a lot of the information you gave us is helpful. I think it will be referred to quite a bit. We have the February 21 meeting coming up. I will be working with you as chair on some of these issues so that they come back before the commissioners. I just have a final word on first responders. I fought forest fires in Ojai when I was in college, and I have a lot of friends who are first responders, and I've been talking with them constantly, and I've seen amazingly heroic things. And we've heard a lot about first responders, and we've thanked them many times. As I mentioned, or some of you know, my brother was a first responder, and he died in the line of duty. I watched his 3 boys grow up. So I can't say enough at how much the rest of us appreciate everything that they've done. So thank you all. Thank you for coming. We are adjourned.
You know that I will not be here on February 21st. It's on the schedule. And yeah, unfortunately, it is.